Oh, welcome in everybody, and today we are talking about the New York Subliners. Normally I do like a big breakdown video, but I was running a little bit short on time today, so I thought why not dial in on one specific team, the team that we're all wanting to talk about the most, the Subliners, and really dive in about what they should be doing this week, how they should potentially be approaching, or what they might actually be doing with their team situation now that it feels like a roster change is looming. We have a lot to get into, and we'll be breaking down the rest of the whole weekend and doing predictions for this upcoming weekend on the podcast this week. So be on the lookout for that, and more videos, of course, always coming around the channel at any time. So hit the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. But without further ado, guys, let's get right into this video. Let's go. All right, so obviously this weekend was a big deal for NYSL for a lot of reasons. They brought Neptune back into the lineup, benching Royalty after just being brought in. And so we got to see Neptune with the Subliners with Crim, and they were experimenting with the roles. There's a lot to dig into here, and we're going to be going into all of it. Basically, they lost 3-1 to London, and that was a London without Gizmo on just a few days practice with Paul X, as Gizmo was back in London for the weekend and Paul X was filling in. It was just a tough situation overall. They lose that one, even though the Gavutu control looked all right. Then they come out, play Florida, lose 3-0 in a pretty ugly series. Not only that, but that puts them at 1-7 in the CDL. And probably the biggest of all, which at this point all of us know, they have not won a hard point. They are 0-13 in hard points. That seems impossible. Like, what? And so I was digging into some of the team stats specifically in hard point. And again, shout out IOU Turtle for his awesome mega doc that he puts out. But right now, let's go through all the hardpoint maps. They're 10th in points per game on Berlin, which Florida hasn't played Berlin, and the Legion's the worst. So really, they're like second worst because Florida hasn't played it. They are the worst, tied for worst on Bocage in points per game. London's only played it once, and they're tied with London because London got body slammed the one time they played it. They're 7th on Gavutu, so actually like respectable on Gavutu, and then they're 6th on Tuscan. Been their best hardpoint so far. Average points in a hardpoint loss, they're actually 6th. So when it comes to like actually being competitive and scoring points in hard points, it's not as bad as it looks on paper, considering they've lost 13 hard points, but they're only 6th in average points scored in a hard point loss. That seems at least a little bit counterintuitive and surprising. Like, LA Thieves is absolutely the worst when they lose hard points. They only score 139.6 hard points when they lose. Like, when they lose, they get blown out, and we saw that like with the Optic series this weekend. Like dating back like their first matches against Toronto, when Toronto body slammed them on Berlin, things along those lines. But it is a really weird situation for NYSL inside of hardpoint, where it seems like every game, just one or two rotations go wrong, or they make a small mistake here. Before we even get into all of the other team problems that they've had, not just dynamics wise and performance wise, but like when it comes into like roster changes here moving forward, it is really tough. When it comes to S&D, they're 3-6. And so they're tied for the worst win percentage in Search and Destroy with the Thieves and with LAG. So they're bottom 3 in S&D win percentage. They're actually respectable in Control, 4-4, 6th overall win percentage in Control. And like we saw like that Gavutu against London, again, London with Paul X. But like in that London series, I mean, they set the record for the biggest kill difference in a round in Control. And like on that map specifically, Clayster was dominating and taking over. So like, you still see those moments of individual talent and those things from like Crim. And like in the S&Ds, we've seen Crim make some really impressive plays. And then of course, we've seen it from Hydra. The bigger problem or question has been, who's this fourth player? And obviously Royalty and Neptune are not working. There's a lot of different things here. With Neptune specifically, I mean, he's played in 4 matches and Royalty's played in 3 of them. This dates back to probably the kickoff event when there was rumors that NYSL was looking to replace Neptune before the kickoff event. Then they played all right at the kickoff event, won a few matches and actually placed pretty well. And so they were like, all right, well, maybe we should, run it back with this team. Maybe we were better than we thought we were in scrims. Let's see what happens at the beginning here. They keep Neptune around. They lose the first 2 series, 3-0'd by Surge, 3-1 by LAG. They're like, all right, well, we can't work this, so let's bring in Royalty. The problem with Royalty is that his first matches were played from Canada on really high ping. So it felt like that those series were absolutely chalked from the beginning. So it took them a little bit to get down to Dallas. So Royalty gets down to Dallas. So now they're all on normal ping for these online matches. and they still get body slammed. So then you bring Neptune back in after stage 1's major against LA Thieves. The problem is you throw Neptune right into the fire. So this is probably the biggest problem I have, and I've seen this take on Twitter a few places as well. You bring Neptune back and then you role switch, and you first tell him to be a main SMG on Gavutu. Literally hell on earth. Good luck, first game back, get burned alive on freaking Gavutu with an SMG. Then they swap, and then Crim runs an SMG on Bocage? What? And then Neptune's running the AR on Bocage? I don't understand, man. So those types of question marks were really surprising to me. Like, why would you just throw him to the fire and use an AR on Bocage after, and use an SMG on Berlin or on Gavutu? I don't understand. So that was a massive question mark. Overall, from the beginning, Crim and Clay specifically didn't believe in this team, specifically didn't believe in Neptune. If they were going into the kickoff event and the beginning of stage 1 with a roster they were already skeptical about, and then they bring in Royalty, obviously that was not the solution. I didn't think that made sense from the beginning, specifically considering Royalty's situation being online. Like in the context of the time crunch that they actually had to learn how to play with Royalty, it just never made sense from the first place for me. Like in my head, I just don't know how you don't try to just make it work with Neptune from the first place. Like maybe you try the role change there, kind of what we're seeing with the Rocker trying the role change with Priest and Attach before you make an actual roster change. It is a tough situation to be in. I get the idea from their part, but man, it not ideal. So there's a handful of different questions that have to be asked and answered to decide the future of NYSL. Question 1, can Clay and Crim play a 4v4 game together in CoD Vanguard? That's the end-all be-all question. And at this point, it feels like the answer's no. Whether it's their play styles or whether it's the slang, maybe it's some combination of both of those things. In 4v4, it doesn't seem to be working. I personally think that either of them individually could still absolutely be a great player. And the formula we're seeing working this year is, like, look at it with Surge, look at it with Boston, look at it with London especially. You put a veteran AR with young studs and then you make it work. And so I think that's the formula that New York should be looking at here. You keep either Clay or Crim and then you build around them, because I absolutely think that both of them could still make it work. The question is, I think you look towards Hydra and you probably ask Hydra, which player do you think you could win more games with, Crim or Clay? Let him decide. And then, or which player would you rather have more fun playing with the rest of the year? Then you decide, bring in 2 new players, and then find a home for Clay or for Crim, the player who Hydra chooses to not play with. And then find a home for that player with a roster switch like that. So I think it can make a lot of sense for maybe 2 or 3 teams to maybe look at that option. So then the question is Neptune the guy? And I just, at this point, it seems hard to believe. I think it's a combination of a handful of things, whether like it's him and Hydra's playstyles not fully meshing. But I really think it's probably more about how Crim and Clay want CoD to be played. It just does not mesh well with Neptune at all. I think people are gonna point too much towards that Neptune was a bad player last year. Like people are gonna be like, oh, see, I told you Neptune was bad last year. I think if you actually watch Florida, did he always make fundamental plays? No, of course not. He didn't. But one thing was for sure is that he had gun scale and he had movement. So whether or not that this game itself doesn't fit his play style well, or it's more of the team environment affecting how he plays, it's probably some sort of combination of both. But I don't think Neptune's the right fit for NYSL at this point, basically for sure. So then the final question that you need to ask is Crim really a flex, or is Crim a main AR, or which one is he better at? And maybe the answer is not clear yet, but that's a question that has to be answered and asked, because that's pretty crucial. I mean, obviously in Cold War, he was a solid main AR. And like we're seeing even this year in S&D, he's still really good at getting first bloods. And when you pair him with a patient team that you can rotate well and play through bomb sites, I think Crim can be an absolute beast still in this game. And in my opinion, I'd rather have Crim stick with the Automaton at this point and then bring in guys, a different flex who could do that. So transitioning that into the conversation of who do you bring in? And at this point, I mean, truly, I think Paul X makes a lot of sense. Like, I know it's ironic that they just lost to him and then you bring him into your team, but really though, I think it makes sense. And I've seen this a lot on Twitter as well with some of these names. His versatility is something that I think Crim or Clay would really appreciate. You can try him out at flex, you can try him at main AR, he could potentially, even if you really need him to, run main SMG at times if you wanted to switch up different roles. And so he could make a lot of sense right off the rip to bring in and slot right into your team as a guy who has a ton of upside. And we've seen him be a really good search and destroy player. So even if NYSL's hardpoint doesn't hit right away, one thing we know for sure is that Paul X is a good S&D player. NYSL's already a pretty good control team. So you could already quickly become a 2-3-5 type of team and then work on those hard points. And so you can get yourself to that middle tier as a 2-3-5 and then start establishing your hard point. I think that can make a lot of sense. The question would be is, do you keep Clay and Crim for a second with Paul and see what could happen with Crim running a main SMG and just try to give it a go? Or do you full send with a 2-person swap? In my opinion, I think you have to do a 2-person swap, and then you have to bring in an SMG. In my opinion, the two probably best options to look at, one is Havoc, which I think is ironic considering Crim and Havoc's like kind of past of like Twitter beef and jokes, which maybe could work. In my opinion, maybe the most interesting player at this point is Brezzy. Because of the French link with Drill being their coach and the history of Brezzy and Hydra playing together, now Brezzy's playing in NA, playing challengers and winning challengers right now with Texas Nation. So I think the fit might be a match made in heaven. So obviously you got to first talk to Brezzy and see if he's willing to run like a SMG or whether or not he's stuck on playing a flex this year. Because of course that limits your options if he is. In the past, he's done both. This year, he runs mostly main flex. Brezzy obviously has been a legit talent for a long time, dating back to even pre-BO4, but especially in BO4, where we really saw Brezzy make some noise. I think some sort of combination of all of those players, whether it's Havoc or Brezzy or Paul or Neptune or Crib, Clay, Hydra, I think there's a winning combination in there somewhere. And so it probably comes down to them trying out scrimming with a few different players, working that out. In an ideal world, Brezzy's very comfortable running a main SMG in this game, and then you bring him in and it works, because I think that combination could be the right one. Otherwise, you're working with Havoc and then you're bringing in Paul, or you're giving it a go with Neptune, bringing in Paul right away, and then either moving Crim to main AR, or giving it a go with Clay and Paul and Neptune and Hydra and seeing what happens there. But I guess we'll have to see. And it probably depends on what Hydra wants to do in the first place as well, because you gotta be building your roster through him at this point for sure. And then the question B is, where does Crim or Clay end up if they get benched? I don't see, like, let's say Crim stays. I don't see Clay retiring, at least not like this. It feels like it's not the right place. It probably depends on what teams think about Clay at this point, but I think Clay can absolutely still be a slayer or a player who can be very valuable to a team. I mean, last year, they were right there as a contender with NYSL for a lot of the season, and I don't even think that roster was fully built out around Clay for it to fully work. It depends on the situation Clay ends up, but I still think he could be an absolutely valuable part to a team, and it could work. So we'll see what happens. I appreciate you guys for dropping in. Give me all your ideas for rosters down below. And also check out this video right here. It's a breakdown of how pros play. I think it's a legit video. It can improve yourself. It can give you a better understanding of what the pros are doing out there when you're watching. I think it's a pretty dope video. Check it out. Hit the notification bell as well. And I'll talk to y'all guys very soon on the podcast as well. Be on the lookout. Peace.